After dozens of rounds of negotiations, the EU still regarded China's electric vehicles as overcapacity in the market in October this year, and even further raised tariffs to 45%. Perhaps they thought that this would force China to give in the competition, but they may not have expected that China's severe counterattack would follow. In November this year, China announced temporary anti-dumping measures on Brandy products imported from the EU and planned to formally implement them on the 15th. It is worth noting that once this measure takes effect, the most affected will be France, the initiator of the high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. When China announced the news, some scholars believe that this move was a quite accurate counterattack against France, because France's Brandy exports mainly rely on the Chinese market. It is estimated that this anti-dumping policy may cause France to lose more than $1 billion each year due to reduced Brandy exports. So, what does China's sanctions on Brandy mean? What conditions will France use to seek a settlement with China? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now, let's get into today's topic. 2024 can be said to be the year when China's electric vehicles have the strongest development momentum. From January to July, China's total exports of new energy vehicles reached 1.17 million, a year-on-year increase of 25%. The European market and Southeast Asia are one of the main destinations. From January to September, China exported 165,000 new energy vehicles to Southeast Asia. So in the first 4 months of this year, the registration volume of electric vehicles made in China and Europe was about 120,000, accounting for 20% of the total registration volume of electric vehicles in the region. In this 20% market share, BYD performed the most outstanding, accounting for 3%, with more than 10,000 registrations. In addition, Chinese electric vehicle brands such as Geely, Weilai, and SAIC also occupy about 2% to 3% of the European market. It is not difficult to see from these data that the growth rate and market share of Chinese electric vehicles are better than those of brands in other countries. But do you know that although 2024 is the best year for the development of Chinese automobiles, it is also the most difficult year? Starting from May this year, the U.S. government announced the imposition of 301 tariffs on Chinese products, including an increase of 100% tariffs on electric vehicles and 25% tariffs on electric vehicle batteries, which are scheduled to be officially implemented from September. Following the United States, the European Union also quickly took similar actions. At the relevant EU meeting, France took the lead in proposing an anti-subsidy investigation on Chinese electric vehicles and received support from other member states. In July, the EU officially launched an anti-subsidy investigation on Chinese electric vehicles and announced the imposition of temporary anti-subsidy duties on imported Chinese pure electric vehicles. In August, the EU issued a draft final ruling on the anti-subsidy investigation on Chinese electric vehicles, proposing to impose anti-subsidy duties of 17% to 36.3% on Chinese electric vehicles. Although China has sent representatives to Europe to discuss the issue of additional tariffs with many countries, the EU finally only slightly reduced the tariff rate to 17% to 35.3%. It was not until October this year that EU member states officially began to vote on specific additional measures. A 17% tariff on BYD, an 18.8% tariff on Geely, a 35.3% tariff on SAIC Group, and a 20% tariff on other brands. Among the 27 member states, 10 countries supported the increase, 5 countries opposed, and 12 countries abstained. This means that the EU has the upper hand in this tariff war against Chinese electric vehicles. Coupled with the existing 10% export tax, the EU finally approved a tariff of up to 45.3% on Chinese electric vehicles and planned to implement it for 5 years. But surprisingly, just as they thought they had won, China's countermeasures were also launched. So, what actions did China take? In fact, as early as when the EU announced the imposition of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. China had already begun to take a series of countermeasures to express its warning. Initially, China imposed export controls on rare earth products, which the EU supply chain relies heavily on. Then, during the negotiations on the China-EU investment agreement, China said it would slow down its investment in Europe and tighten the market access approval process for some EU companies in China. By July 2024, China further announced an anti-dumping investigation on pork exported from the EU. This measure could lead to a significant drop in the EU's share of the Chinese pork market, with an estimated drop of between 30% and 40%. Moreover, China has successively launched anti-subsidy and anti-dumping investigations on EU dairy and milk products. In addition, China also plans to restrict the import of European gasoline vehicles on the grounds of emission reduction. It is worth mentioning that these anti-subsidy investigations have not been officially implemented, but are a warning measure to the EU. Until the end of October this year, the EU officially confirmed the imposition of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and implemented them immediately. This decision made the situation almost irreversible. In November, China preliminarily determined that some brandy imported from the EU was dumped and believed that such dumping posed a substantial threat of damage to the domestic brandy industry, and confirmed the causal relationship between dumping and the threat. To this end, China announced that it would take temporary anti-dumping measures on brandy imported from the EU, which will take effect immediately from November 15th. And temporary anti-dumping measures will be implemented on imported related brandy originating from the EU in the form of a deposit, with a deposit ratio of 30.6% to 39%. It is worth noting that this measure does not set a clear end date, which means that EU brandy may face the long-term risk of losing the Chinese market. More importantly, the Chinese market and the US market are the two major export destinations for EU brandy. The precision of this countermeasure is self-evident, especially for France, the main country that promotes the imposition of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. According to surveys, France is the world's leading producer of brandy, especially the brandy in the Cognac region, which is one of the most prestigious brandy-producing regions in the world. According to data from the French National Cognac Industry Administration, in 2023, France's cognac brandy industry involved 4,400 farms, 120 professional wineries, and 270 traders, directly creating 15,000 jobs and indirectly providing up to 70,000 jobs. China is the largest export market for the French cognac industry, accounting for 23.3% of the total global exports of French brandy. In contrast, even the United States, which is famous for its wine imports, is only the second largest market for French brandy, accounting for only 18%. In 2023, France's total exports of brandy reached 1.7 billion euros, while China imported 4.26 million liters of brandy from the European Union, about 61.5 million bottles, with a total amount of more than $1 billion. But now, because the French government has always supported the EU's policy of imposing tariffs on China, the brandy industry has become a victim of the Sino-European trade game. It is worth noting that given that 99% of the brandy exported from the EU to China comes from France, this news has caused widespread concern in the French brandy industry. Because after the announcement in China, it obviously means that the share prices of French spirits producers have been hit hard. Among them, the share price of Hennessy's LVMH fell by more than 3%, and the share price of Remy Cointreau Group fell by more than 8%. For some brandy producers who rely on exports, losing the Chinese market is almost a life-or-death test because 60% of their profits depend on overseas consumers. According to the 30.6% to 39% deposit ratio set by China, if French brandy manufacturers want to maintain the current export volume, they need to pay at least $550 million in deposits. This is undoubtedly unbearable for manufacturers because the deposit cost far exceeds the transportation costs and profit gains, making it almost impossible to continue exporting. Of course, For such a large and mature market as China, it is almost impossible for them to find an equivalent alternative market. Previously, Hennessy's CEO publicly stated, "China is our future." When asked which market will come after the Chinese market, he emphasized, "After China, it's still China." But the current market is beginning to fluctuate, and brand value and product prices are bound to be seriously affected. If French Brandy faces the pressure of unsaleable products, it may eventually have to be sold at a discount, which is expected to damage the brand value by more than $1 billion. In fact, in addition to the significant impact on French Brandy, Spain, Italy, and Germany also have a certain position in brandy production, but the export volume to China is relatively small. Data shows that Spain's exports of brandy are only $1.976 million. Although Italy and Germany have brandy production technology, their exports are not counted separately, which shows that their market share is very limited. Compared with France, these countries have suffered much less losses in the brandy trade. But you may question that China has sanctioned French brandy, and 99% of China's brandy is imported from France. Will this not have an impact on itself? In fact, China's brandy consumption market is relatively small, and the impact of relevant anti-dumping measures on the domestic market is very limited. Although the import volume is huge, this is mainly due to the total demand brought by China's huge population base. Moreover, China also has the ability to produce brandy. As the world factory, China is fully capable of meeting the domestic market demand. In France, representatives of several brandy industry associations have held talks with President Macron. They all agreed that China's anti-dumping investigation is not a simple legal issue, but a political issue that must be resolved through political means. In this regard, Macron made a commitment to the industry and said that he would personally participate in seeking a solution. In fact, if this matter cannot be resolved, then China has other countermeasures after the anti-dumping investigation. From the past few years, we have shown that under the double encirclement of the United States and Europe, China's electric vehicle industry has not stagnated, but has quickly adjusted its strategy. Because many Chinese companies have begun to invest in emerging markets such as the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. Take BYD as an example. After acquiring a 20% stake in an official distributor in Thailand, the Chinese electric vehicle giant plans to open its first manufacturing plant in the Southeast Asian market. According to BYD, the annual production of this factory will reach 150,000 vehicles. At the same time, Chinese electric vehicles have also begun to blossom in the Latin American market. In the first 4 months of 2024, the sales of Chinese new energy vehicles in Brazil soared to 48,000 vehicles, a full 8 times that of the same period last year. In the list of best-selling models in the Brazilian market, 3 of the top 5 are from Chinese brands. Therefore, the EU must understand that China is not afraid of losing the EU market, but it is difficult for the EU to give up the Chinese market. To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.